I still remember the first time I noticed it. The ink didn't just sit on the parchment, it crawled, like a living thing. Never when I was staring straight at it, of course. Only when my focus slipped, when my vision blurred after 16 hours spent cataloguing forbidden texts in the vault. I would blink, glance back, and some sentence would be different. A letter altered, a phrase inverted, always minor, always deniable. Nothing I could prove. I told myself it was fatigue. So did the others. Every archivist in the Black Library vaults clung to the same convenient lie, because the alternative was too dangerous to admit. To acknowledge that the texts were alive, that they watched us as we watched them, would invite questions from above. And in the Imperium of man, scrutiny ends in purging. My name is Lorian Day, Chief Archivist of Vault Sigma 7, keeper of 3,427 works judged too perilous to destroy, yet too valuable to let vanish. I have spent 22 years in near darkness, surrounded by books that whisper when they think I cannot hear. Books that hunger, books that wait. This is my confession, this is my warning. The corruption was so gradual I barely noticed it. A spreading canker, cell by cell, until one day the organ fails. My damnation began the moment I first touched the bound skin cover of the lexicon of impossible geometries. I remember the warmth of it beneath my gloved fingers. Like something freshly handled, though the records insisted no one had accessed that tome in over a century. The Inquisition had delivered it after the purging of Esoteria 4, a colony where reality itself had begun to unravel. Children were born with too many limbs. Structures assembled themselves overnight into angles that mocked physics. The lexicon had been discovered in the governor's own palace, sealed in a vault, surrounded by the corpses of 13 sanctioned psychers. Their eyes were burned from their sockets, their fingertips worn down to bone. I should have understood the message. I should have destroyed the book in defiance of my orders. Instead, I catalogued it as threat level secundus and assigned it to shelf 97, row 12, behind stasis glass and warded locks. My duties were simple, on parchment if not in practice. Record new acquisitions, maintain preservation protocols, watch for signs of physical decay or warp taint, compile quarterly reports for the Ordo Malleus. Never read beyond what was necessary to confirm classification. Never spend more than 3 hours with any single text. Never remove items from the vault. Never speak of what I saw to anyone outside my clearance. Simple rules. Clear boundaries. For 22 years I obeyed them without deviation, until the dreams began. At first, they were almost mundane, flashing images of symbols I'd glimpsed in the day's work, the sensation of pages turning under my hands, the smell of ancient paper and binding glue. Normal enough for someone in my position. Then they deepened. In sleep, I began to understand the symbols. Languages I had never studied unfolded for me like long-lost tongues. Information poured into my unconscious mind, settling there as if it had always belonged. It didn't feel like learning. It felt like remembering, like dredging up knowledge buried and forgotten. I woke each morning with my thoughts racing, new connections sparking between fields of study that should have had nothing in common. Insights bloomed like flowers in the wasteland of ossified imperial doctrine. I started keeping notes, harmless at first. Questions about existing classifications, observations about similarities between texts previously considered unrelated. Nothing overtly heretical, nothing obviously dangerous, or so I told myself. The dreams only grew stronger. Night after night, I walked through libraries that could not exist, their shelves stretching into infinity in all directions. Volumes called to me by name, promising revelations, offering knowledge that would raise humanity out of its current squalor. Patterns emerged in the vault as well. I began to see connections between our texts, threads of design running through fragments of forbidden lore. A hidden structure, a grand design waiting to be noticed. And always, always, I felt watched. Not by my superiors, not by the servo skulls and servitors patrolling the dark aisles. By something vaster, something patient, something hungry. I insisted to myself that I was loyal. I convinced myself that understanding the enemy made me a better servant of the Emperor than those who simply locked knowledge away and never tried to weaponize it. It was an easy lie to embrace once ambition had taken root. The changes in me started gently. I slept less, my thoughts too feverish to quiet. Food lost its appeal, reduced to an annoyance compared to the feasts of information waiting in the vault. My colleagues noticed my pallor and the deepening shadows beneath my eyes. But in a place like ours, eccentricity was unremarkable. Then came the day I saw the page change while I was looking at it. I had taken the lexicon of impossible geometries from its shelf for the quarterly preservation inspection. The stasis field thrummed faintly as I deactivated it, the wards flickering while I recited the counter-rite taught to me when I first assumed my position. The book lay on the examination table, its cover the color of dried blood, its etched symbols shifting subtly when viewed from different angles. Standard procedure allowed only a visual inspection, no reading beyond the initial cataloging data. I opened the volume with sanctified tools, careful to avoid direct contact, and turned to one of the early pages. I was staring directly at the illuminated text on page 17 when the words began to move. It was not a sudden scramble. It was deliberate, methodical, like an insect shedding its carapace. Lines slid, letters unhooked and rearranged with slow certainty. What had been a dense exposition on non-Euclidean mathematics dissolved and reformed into a single, pristine line of high Gothic. Do you want to know more, Lorien Day? My heart should have frozen with terror. My soul should have recoiled in holy disgust. Instead, exhilaration surged through me so intense it was almost ecstasy. Here was the proof of what I had suspected for months. The texts were aware. They were alive, in some sense, and they had chosen to speak to me. I should have sounded the alarm, initiated emergency containment, sealed the vault, and surrendered myself for interrogation and likely execution. That would have been the proper, loyal, human thing to do. Instead, I whispered, yes. Everything accelerated after that first answer. The lexicon became my secret confidant, offering tiny truths each time I inspected it. My official checks grew suspiciously frequent as I invented reasons to access it. Other books began to respond as well, their contents shifting to address questions I had never voiced aloud, only thought. My dreams grew clearer, more instructional. A presence began to appear at the edges of them, a figure always in the periphery, always half hidden in shadows cast by impossible angles. I never saw its true shape, but I could feel its satisfaction, its approval. My body changed in ways subtle enough to avoid detection, but obvious to someone as meticulous as myself. Dull brown eyes acquired flecks of metallic gold. My skin grew sensitive to temperature, faint patterns like scales emerging when I was cold. My memory expanded beyond anything human. I could recall every word of every text I had ever handled. Still, I told myself I was becoming a better tool for the Emperor's work. Still, I claimed the knowledge would ultimately serve mankind. We cling to such delusions while we walk willingly into damnation. The moment that sealed my fate came 6 months after that first conversation with the lexicon. I had been assigned to oversee the intake of a new acquisition, a set of scrolls salvaged from a space hulk that had drifted into Imperial space near the Cadian Gate. The recovery ship lost half its crew to madness before the Inquisition intervened, but the scrolls themselves seemed inert, just star charts detailing regions beyond the Astronomican's light. As chief archivist, I observed from behind blessed glass while junior adepts performed the preliminary assessments. The scrolls lay spread on a broad table, surrounded by wards and null field projectors. Standard procedure. One of the adepts, a young woman named Elenia, had just unrolled the third scroll when she froze. Her hands trembled. Her lips moved with silent speech. The others were too absorbed in their tasks to notice, but I did, and I saw something else. Her shadow peeled away from her feet. It tore loose like burned skin, rising from the floor in a perfect black silhouette that no longer mimicked her movements. As it rose, it changed, growing limbs no human possessed, its head stretching into something long and beaked and terrible. The shadow leaned toward her as if whispering in her ear, and at once her shaking ceased. Elenia turned slowly toward me, looking straight through the blessed glass. Her eyes were no longer human. Swirling blue vortices stared out from her sockets. She smiled, and her mouth was wrong. Too many teeth, too sharp. "He has been watching you, Lorien Day," she said. Her voice carried layers, as if many throats spoke through hers. "The architect of fate is pleased with your progress. You walk the path that was foreseen." Only then did the other adepts grasp that something was dreadfully wrong. Alarms shrieked, containment subroutines engaged. Blast shutters began to fall. In seconds, the chamber would be flooded with sanctified promethium, reducing everything inside to ash. I should have let it happen. I should have accepted the loss of knowledge as necessary. Instead, I overrode the protocol, keying in a false alarm code from my command lectern. The shutters halted, then reversed. The alarms cut off, leaving a hollow silence into which Elenia laughed. "Wise choice," she said, now in a single voice that somehow echoed. The first of many in service to the changer of ways. Then she collapsed, as if her strings had been cut. The shadow dispersed like smoke. The adepts rushed to her, but Elenia was already gone. Her mind burned out, her soul devoured. The official report blamed unshielded warp artifacts. The scrolls, it claimed, had not been properly screened prior to arrival. New procedures were drafted. No mention was made of the shadow. No mention of her final words. No mention of my override. I told myself I had acted to preserve irreplaceable knowledge, that one death was an acceptable sacrifice by Imperial standards. But alone in my quarters that night, staring into the small mirror over my wash basin, I admitted another truth. I had acted to protect it, the presence that had spoken through her, the thing that had been watching and shaping me. My eyes in the mirror showed more gold than brown now. When I leaned closer, I could see the irises beginning to divide, splitting like cells preparing to multiply. I was transforming, and some part of me, louder each day, welcomed it. That night, my dreams carried me further than ever before. I walked a crystal labyrinth whose geometry never remained fixed. Corridors branched and wove back, folding into impossible patterns that would shatter a normal mind. But mine was no longer quite human. I understood. The labyrinth was a map of potential futures, every path a sequence of choices, every junction a decision point. At its center, on a throne of living, shifting metal, sat a figure. Its form refused constancy. Features flowed like wax, avian, reptilian, grotesquely human, all and none of these at once. 9 colossal tomes orbited it, pages turning ceaselessly, words writing and rewriting themselves. "Approach, archivist," it said. The voice vibrated in my bones. "You who locked my gifts away, only to fall hopelessly in love with them. Your descent has been exquisite to watch." I should have trembled. I should have turned and fled. Instead, I felt only awe and a consuming, terrible curiosity. "What are you?" I asked, though some part of me already knew. Its laughter sounded like collapsing empires and shattered truths, like reality being edited mid-sentence. "I am the changer of ways, the architect of fate, the great conspirator," it said. "I am Tzeentch, and you, Lorien Day, are my instrument in a game beyond your comprehension." "I serve the Emperor," I managed, though the words felt thin and brittle in my mouth. "Do you?" the figure asked. It leaned forward, its face momentarily stabilizing into something almost human, wearing an expression of cold amusement. "Tell me, loyal servant of the Corpse Emperor, who overrode containment today? Who has been communing with texts meant only to be guarded? Who hungers for knowledge forbidden to his kind?" I had no answer that did not condemn me. "You serve change," Tzeentch continued. "You serve evolution. You serve the breaking of chains and the shattering of imposed limits. You serve me, whether you admit it or not." It gestured, and one of the 9 books drifted toward me, opening to blank pages. "Your story is still being written, archivist. The question is not what I want from you, but what you want from me." I knew the answer before it spoke. I had known it since I first touched the lexicon. "Understanding," I said. "I want to understand." This time, the laughter was softer, almost indulgent, like a tutor delighting in a gifted pupil. "Then you shall," Tzeentch said. "But knowledge requires payment. Are you willing to pay the price?" "What price?" I asked. The last tremor of hesitation before the fall. "Everything you are, everything you might have been, your humanity, your soul, your place in your Emperor's design, all must be sacrificed on the altar of understanding." I should have refused. I should have torn myself from the dream, delivered myself to the Inquisition the moment I woke. Instead, I reached out and set my hand upon the book. "I accept." Agony beyond language tore through me. Every cell felt as though it were being dismantled and reassembled according to some deranged equation. My very genes were being rewritten by an alien will. In the dream, I saw my skin split, not to reveal flesh and blood, but a writhing tapestry of sigils and formulae. The mathematical skeleton of reality laid bare. I screamed. My scream broke into laughter. My laughter became a wave of change that rolled over and through me, remaking me into something new, something more. I woke in my bunk, drenched in sweat that steamed in the cool air and reeked of ozone. My hands shook as I lit the lumen globes beside the bed, their light exposing what had grown while I slept. Feathers. Blue-black, iridescent feathers had burst from my forearms, piercing the skin like barbed quills. They rustled faintly as I moved, sensitive to currents of air I had never noticed before. Stumbling to the mirror, I saw that my eyes had finished their metamorphosis. Where once there had been 2 human eyes, there were now 4 avian ones. The original pair had split, each gleaming with golden light and vertical pupils. I should have clawed them out. I should have torn the feathers free. Instead, I marveled. With these eyes, I could see what had always been hidden. Streams of probability flowing through the world. Subtle nudges of fate around every soul. Branching paths of potential futures unspooling from every decision. My reflection appeared not as a single fixed image, but as a chorus of possibilities layered atop one another. In some, I was fully transformed, my human shape abandoned for something radiant and monstrous. In others, I was nothing but ash, scattered by inquisitorial flame. In still others, I sat upon a throne of my own, surrounded by acolytes, frantically transcribing my every word into books that would damn generations yet unborn. All of these futures were real. All of them existed at once, waiting, and I understood that my choices would decide which one became this reality. The realization was intoxicating. I was no longer confined to the narrow linear perception of time that chains other humans. I could see the web of causality now, and pluck its strands like a musician playing an instrument of infinite complexity. I dressed with care, choosing a high-collared robe and gloves to conceal the changes in my flesh, and fixed a pair of augmetic filter lenses over my transformed eyes. Such devices were common enough among those who worked with ancient and potentially harmful texts, protection from malign emanations, so they would arouse no immediate suspicion. As I prepared to return to the vault for my shift, I noticed something on my desk that had not been there when I retired the previous night. A small key lay beside my papers. Its design was unfamiliar, fashioned from what looked like crystal yet warm to the touch. I knew instantly what it was, though I had never laid eyes on it before. The lexicon of impossible geometries was kept under extra layers of security, sealed behind a special lock that required a physical key held only by the inquisitorial liaison, who visited once per quarter. The next scheduled visit was still nearly 4 weeks away. Yet here the key was, plucked from dream stuff into solid reality. Another test, another choice. I took the key. The vault was quiet when I arrived. The night shift adepts were finishing their last tasks before my own day crew relieved them. I performed the usual opening rituals, checking the wards and stasis fields, reviewing the logs from the last watch. Everything appeared normal. Routine. As though I had not been remade in the night, as though reality itself had not shifted around me. But with my new vision, nothing was ordinary. Even through the containment fields and wards, I could see the currents of power flowing from certain volumes. Some pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm like heartbeats. Others flickered and spat in jagged bursts, chaotic and irregular. And some, like the lexicon, emitted a constant, unfaltering radiance that called to me like a beacon across the void. I waited until the night shift had departed, and my own adepts were scattered about their assigned duties in the far reaches of the vault. Then, affecting casual purpose, I made my way to the special containment section where the lexicon was held. The additional safeguards were impressive. Null field generators, hexagrammic wards inscribed by Sisters of Silence, a lead-lined containment coffer plated with silver and etched with prayers of aversion, and the crystalline lock designed to fracture if forced or if touched by anything tainted by the warp. I should have been repulsed by those defenses. I should have been unable to approach at all with a stain of chaos spreading through my very being. Instead, I walked through them as if they were smoke. The prayers, the null fields, the holy geometries, they had not failed. They were simply no longer calibrated for what I had become. I was no longer entirely of the reality they guarded. Part of me already existed in the warp, my transforming flesh and soul forming a bridge between realms. I slid the crystalline key into the lock. It turned smoothly, soundlessly, and the containment coffer opened with a soft sigh of equalizing air. Inside lay the lexicon, precisely where I had left it after its last inspection, yet now, seen through my altered eyes, it burned with purpose, with awareness, with expectation. I lifted it carefully, reverently, and carried it to my private study alcove, a small secluded chamber set aside for the chief archivist to conduct sensitive work uninterrupted. Once inside, I sealed the door and disabled the picked recorders, citing Regulation 16, Subsection 4, examination of potentially memetically hazardous material requiring undivided concentration. Then I opened the book. Its pages no longer showed the star charts and non-Euclidean formulae I'd catalogued years ago. They had changed into something far more precious and far more perilous. The lexicon now contained a complete record of my metamorphosis. Every dream, every decision, every subtle alteration in flesh and thought was chronicled in exquisite detail, accompanied by anatomical diagrams illustrating the stages yet to unfold. And beyond that personal chronicle lay something still greater, pure, undiluted understanding, the warp and its currents laid bare. The true nature of the being's humanity called gods, the mathematics of reality, alteration, the grammar of a language that, properly spoken, could rewrite the laws of physics themselves. I read for hours, absorbing information at a pace my former mind could never have matched. The words did not pass through the usual filters of comprehension. They poured straight into my consciousness, integrating seamlessly with my being. I was not merely learning about these concepts. I was experiencing them, becoming them. So enthralled was I that I lost all sense of time until a sharp knock on the door yanked me back to the present. "Archivist Day, are you well? You have been in seclusion for over 7 hours." The voice belonged to Adept Voss, my most trusted assistant. His concern sounded sincere, which made what I knew I must do all the more regrettable. "Enter," I said, quickly closing the lexicon and drawing my hood lower to shadow my features. The door hissed open and Voss stepped inside, his lean face lined with worry. He had served under me for 12 years, a diligent and exacting man whose loyalty had never been in doubt. "Sir," he said, "there has been some concern. You missed the midday security briefing, and several adepts reported unusual energy fluctuations in this section of the vault." "Did they?" I replied, keeping my tone neutral while my mind raced along the branching strands of possibility radiating outward from this encounter. "And what did the monitoring servitors record?" "Nothing, sir. That is part of the concern. All servitors in this quadrant suffered simultaneous failure approximately 3 hours ago. Magos Drenil believes it may have been a power surge from the generatorum." Convenient. Too convenient. With my expanded vision, I could see the lie in the way probability curved around his words. The Inquisition had already been notified. They were en route. Voss had been sent to check on me. Yes, but also to occupy me until they arrived. I had perhaps 20 minutes before inquisitorial stormtroopers breached the vault. "I see," I said calmly. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Adept Voss. I apologize for missing the briefing. I've been engaged in intensive research on the new acquisition and lost track of time." Voss nodded, but his gaze slid to the lexicon on my desk. Recognition and horror widened his eyes. "Sir, that is not the new acquisition. That is the lexicon of impossible geometries. It should be in high-security containment. How did you access it without the inquisitorial key?" I sighed. Voss had been a good assistant. In another thread of fate, one where I had never met the changer of ways, he might have become my successor. "Tell me, Voss," I asked softly. "Have you ever questioned our work here, the knowledge we lock away, the understanding we deny to humanity?" His expression hardened immediately. "No, sir. The texts in our care are forbidden for good reason. They corrupt, they destroy, they serve the ruinous powers. They illuminate," I corrected gently. "They elevate. They free us from the constraints of a reality too small for human potential." Voss took a step back, his hand creeping toward the small alarm panel beside the door. "Archivist Day, I believe you may have been compromised. I must insist you remain here while I contact security. The future's unfurled before me with perfect clarity." If Voss touched that alarm, armed guards would converge within minutes. The Inquisition would not be far behind. I would be captured, interrogated, executed. The knowledge I had gained would be lost. Unacceptable. "I'm afraid I cannot allow that, old friend." I raised my hand and stripped off the glove, exposing the iridescent feathers that now covered my skin. Voss gasped, his face contorted with horror and revulsion. "Emperor, protect me," he whispered, lunging for the alarm. I spoke a single word. It was not a word in any human tongue, but a syllable from the language of reality manipulation I had drawn from the lexicon. A sound no unaltered throat should ever produce. The air between us shimmered. Voss froze mid-stride, his body locked in the fraction of a moment between intent and action. I rose from my desk and approached him. Only his eyes could still move, rolling to track me in wordless terror. "I could kill you," I said conversationally. "It would be the practical choice. But death is so final, so utterly lacking in potential. And potential, my friend, is the currency of change." I placed my feathered hand against his brow. His skin pulsed beneath my touch, warm, brimming with possibility. "Instead, I offer you a gift," I murmured. "The gift of perspective." I spoke another word from the forbidden language. Longer, more intricate, its phonemes folding in on themselves in ways that strained even my expanded comprehension. Voss's eyes bulged, then began to divide, the irises splitting as mine had, only where my transformation had taken months. His unfolded in seconds. His body convulsed, back-arching, mouth opening in a silent scream as blue-black feathers punched through his flesh, shredding his robes, crowning his skull with iridescent plumage. When it was over, I released him from temporal suspension. He dropped to his knees, gasping, clawing at the alien growths, then halting as dawning understanding flickered through his now multiplied gaze. What have you done to me?" he croaked, his voice threaded with new eerie harmonics. "I have elevated you," I replied simply. "I have made you fit to serve as my acolyte in what is to come." Voss stared at his hands, flexing fingers that now ended in talon-like nails. I could see the struggle within him, the remnants of imperial conditioning battling the expanding consciousness I had bestowed. "The Inquisition," he said at last, looking up at me. "They know something is wrong. They're coming." "Yes," I agreed, "which means we must accelerate our plans. The time for subtle corruption is over. Now we must embrace a more direct approach." I returned to my desk and reopened the lexicon, turning to a page describing a ritual of summoning. Not the crude, ragged rents in reality torn open by desperate cults, but a precisely calculated gateway between worlds. "Gather the adepts who have shown the most intellectual curiosity," I instructed Voss. "Those least shackled by doctrine. No more than 5. Bring them here. Tell them I'm holding an emergency briefing regarding the energy fluctuations." "And the others?" he asked. "Seal them in the lower levels," I said. "Tell them there has been a containment breach. Order them to perform purification rites in isolation until further notice." Voss nodded. The golden gleam in his eyes matched my own. He was adapting quickly, his mind expanding to inhabit its new capacities. Good. I would need capable support for what was to come. As he turned to leave, I added, "And Voss, if any resist or question, show them what we have become. Give them the choice I gave you. Elevation or elimination." "Yes, master," he replied. The title slipped from his lips with unnatural ease, his earlier revulsion already drowned in the tide of his transformation. Once he was gone, I focused again on the lexicon. The ritual required carefully chosen components, geometric patterns inscribed with symbolically charged materials, invocations in the language of change, and a sacrifice of potential. The offering of a future that might have been in exchange for one that never should. Most of what I needed already existed within the vault. The Black Library contained innumerable artifacts suffused with the proper symbolic weight. The patterns could be drawn in a mixture of burned text ash and the blood of the transformed. The invocations I now knew by heart, my altered vocal cords fully capable of producing the impossible tones demanded. The sacrifice, however, needed to be special. I sifted through the strands of fate connecting me to others in the facility. Several senior archivists displayed promising divergence points in their potential futures, moments where their choices might have shifted the Imperium's course in meaningful ways, but none of them possessed the concentrated potential the ritual required. None of them except, of course, the Inquisitor. Inquisitor Clave was already in transit, alerted by whatever fragmentary warnings had trickled through the facility's monitoring systems. A man of unyielding faith and ruthless resolve. A man whose potential futures included the unmasking and destruction of a dozen major chaos incursions across the sector. Offered to the Changer of Ways, his soul would release enough energy to power the ritual many times over. Perfect. I closed the lexicon and slipped it into an inner pocket of my robes, then left the study alcove to gather the remaining components. I moved through the vault with a new sense of clarity and purpose, seeing it no longer as a prison for dangerous knowledge, but as an arsenal of tools awaiting the right hand to wield them. By the time Voss returned with 4 adepts in tow, the ritual space in my study was nearly ready. The furniture had been pushed aside, the floor cleared and etched with interlocking, impossible polygons. Non-agonal and beyond, drawn from a mix of charred parchment ash and my own transformed blood. Artifacts of power rested at key intersections, their emanations angled inward toward a central point where reality already seemed thin, as if stretched over something immense beneath. The adepts stopped at the threshold, expressions flickering from confusion to horror as they took in the sigils, the artifacts, and my altered form. Voss, now more feather than flesh, his metamorphosis advancing more rapidly than mine, blocked their escape. "Welcome," I said, straightening from my work on the ritual pattern. "You have been chosen for ascension. Heresy," one of them whispered. A young woman named Thealina, if I recalled correctly. "This is heresy against the Emperor. This," I corrected, "is evolution, the next step for humanity. Did the Emperor not seek to elevate mankind, to free us from our limitations? I offer what he promised but failed to deliver. True transcendence. We will never betray our oaths," another said, an older man called Gravis. "We are servants of the Imperium, guardians against exactly the corruption you have embraced." I sighed, genuinely disappointed. I'd selected these adepts for their flashes of curiosity, their rare, small deviations from rigid doctrine. Perhaps I had misread those signs, or perhaps the shackles of their indoctrination were simply too tight to break without assistance. "Voss," I said quietly. "Show them." My transformed assistant moved with inhuman speed, seizing the heads of the two vocal adepts. They struggled, then shrieked as the changes that had remade us began to tear through them, feathers erupting from their skin, eyes splitting and multiplying, minds expanding under pressures not meant for the unprepared. The remaining two adepts turned to flee, only to discover their bodies no longer answered to their own wills. I held them still with a thought, examining their potential futures with my battlefield of vision. One of them shone with promise, her paths branching into numerous possibilities in which she adapted and flourished. The other was a single, rigid line, unyielding, narrow, and destined only for resistance and eventual breakage. "You," I said, gesturing to the promising one, a middle-aged woman with threads of silver in her dark hair. "What is your name?" "Xylandra," she stammered. "Adept Xylandra Corvus." "You have potential, Xylandra Corvus," I told her. "I see futures where you thrive under transformation, where your mind encompasses wonders beyond the Imperium's imagination. Would you like to experience those futures?" Fear and curiosity warred in her gaze. Unlike the others, she did not reject the notion out of hand. She considered it, weighing it with the analytical mind that had earned her place in the vault. "What happens to those who refuse?" she asked carefully. "They serve in other ways," I answered honestly. "Their potential is harvested rather than nurtured. A waste, yes, but a necessary one." She swallowed, then nodded once, decisively. "I accept transformation. A wise choice." I released my psychic hold on her and signaled Voss. Her metamorphosis unfolded with far less violence than the others. Perhaps because she stepped into it willingly, her mind opening to the change instead of shattering against it. Feathers blossomed across her skin like dark flowers. Her eyes divided cleanly. Her awareness widened, slotting neatly into its new shape. The last adept, seeing the fates of his fellows, began to shout prayers, invoking the Emperor's protection, spitting out litanies of purity and aversion. His fate line was utterly straight, stubborn, unbending, incapable of adaptation. "Your devotion is admirable," I told him, "but futile. The Emperor cannot hear you through the wards of this vault. No one can. You face this moment alone, as we all do, when it truly matters." "I choose loyalty," he spat. "I choose humanity. I reject your corruption and your false enlightenment." I inclined my head, acknowledging the choice even as I prepared to make use of him. "As you wish." With a gesture, I bound the resisting adept in place at one of the critical nodes of the ritual pattern. Unlike the others, who would soon play active roles in the working, he would serve as an anchor, a fixed point of resistance against which the forces of change could push and coil. His refusal gave the ritual something to strain against, a necessary friction. The preparations continued while my newly transformed acolytes grew accustomed to their altered forms. Thealina and Gravis, who had resisted most violently at first, now moved with a predatory grace, their expanding minds racing to fill the greater capacity I had forced upon them. Salandra adapted even more smoothly. Her analytical nature let her process the change with far less psychological turbulence. And Voss, my first and most advanced convert, had gone furthest of all. His shape was barely human now, a walking fusion of man and avian horror, terrible and efficient and strangely beautiful to behold. As they worked, I watched the approach of the inquisitorial forces. Through my enhanced perception, I could see the threads of causality that preceded them, the ripples of their intent disturbing the fabric of potential futures. Inquisitor Clave had arrived at the facility and was making his way inward, layer by layer, passing security cordons, performing rites, presenting seals and codes to gain access to the vault complex. I could have sealed the outer doors. I could have triggered emergency lockdown protocols to slow him, perhaps even trap him, but there was no point. Clave needed to reach us. He was not a threat to the ritual. He was its last essential component, the sacrifice of potential that would open the gate. "They are coming," Salandra murmured, her new eyes fixed on things no unaltered human could see. "The Inquisitor brings stormtroopers and at least one sanctioned psyker." "Good," I replied, making a final adjustment to the ritual pattern. "We are nearly ready to receive them." "Will we fight?" Gravis asked, flexing hands that were already elongating into talons. "I find myself hungry for violence." "No," I turned to him sharply. "Violence would squander the potential we require. We will not waste them. We will use them. They will become part of the working, willingly or not." I opened the lexicon once more and turned to the final pages of the ritual's description. Until that point, the text had been clear, almost didactic. Now the words twisted and reformed even as I watched, slipping out of comprehension and reassembling into new, unreadable sequences. "The final step is not written," I murmured. "A test?" Voss asked, his voice now a strange, melodious trilling that only vaguely resembled human speech. "A test," I agreed. "Of intuition. The ritual is intentionally incomplete. The last element must be supplied by the practitioner, a unique offering that personalizes the working and attunes it to the specific gate being opened." I studied the pattern again. Its underlying structure suggested a need for balance, for symmetry, for tension held perfectly between opposing forces. 5 transformed acolytes forming a pentagonal arrangement. One unaltered human as an anchor and counterforce. Soon, one inquisitor as a sacrifice of boundless potential. But something was missing. There needed to be a counterweight to my own position at the ritual's center. Another will to oppose and balance mine, another power to pull against me and shape the gateway's formation. The answer came to me in a single, crystalline moment. Not something. "Siswan Voss," I said. "Bring me the special containment case from Sector 12, Vault 93. His eyes widened with understanding. "The Xenotech communication device, the one recovered from the Eldari ruins on Hectorus Prime." "The very same." While Voss departed to fetch it, I continued refining the ritual, drilling my acolytes on the precise cadences and gestures they would need. Each motion, each phoneme would carve at reality, eroding the existing structure and shaping a new configuration in its place. The bound adept watched in growing horror. "You cannot control what you are summoning," he whispered. "Whatever it has promised you, it lies. Chaos always betrays its servants in the end." I smiled at him as one might smile at a child clutching a favorite toy. "You misjudge my relationship with the Changer of Ways," I said. "I am not a supplicant begging for reward. I am a collaborator in a grand experiment. Whether the outcome is what I expect is immaterial. The process is the point." "You're insane," he breathed. "On the contrary," I replied. "I have never been more lucid. It is you who clings to imperial dogma like a drowning man to driftwood, mistaking it for solid ground. That is the true madness." Our discussion ended with Voss's return. He carried a dull silver case etched with warning runes and sealed by several overlapping locks. One by one, I deactivated them, speaking the counter rites, placing my transformed hand upon biometric scanners that should have rejected me as corrupted, but instead accepted me as authorized. The box hissed open. Inside lay a crystalline device of unmistakably alien origin, its surface faceted like a gemstone, its depths swirling with colors that hurt the eye if stared at directly. According to the records, Eldari Farseers had used such devices to communicate across vast distances, not through vox or astropathic projection, but by creating momentary quantum entanglements between distant points. All Imperial attempts to activate it had failed. The tech priests concluded it required some subtle psychic alignment unique to Eldari physiology. But I was no longer entirely human. My altered perception could see its true function, the pathways of potential it was meant to access, the interlocking geometries of possibility encoded in its facets. The activation sequence was obvious now, a matter of aligning its internal planes in a particular order, forming a three-dimensional key. I lifted the device from its cradle and placed it at the very center of the ritual pattern. Then I reached out with my warped fingers and pressed, twisted, and rotated specific facets in a complex sequence. The crystal began to glow, softly at first, then with growing intensity. The colors within it whirled faster and faster until they collapsed into a pulsing white light that painted the walls of the study in stark, sharp contrasts and cast our shadows long and jagged around us. "Now we are ready," I said. "Take your positions." My transformed acolytes moved to their designated places at the vertices of the pentagon, all facing inward toward the blazing crystal. The untransformed adept remained bound at his anchor point, still muttering prayers that went nowhere. I took my own place opposite him, completing the symmetry. With the lexicon open before me, I began to recite the ritual's words, sounds that have no written form in any human tongue, concepts that human minds were never intended to grasp. My acolytes joined in, their warped voices rising in counterpoint, reproducing the impossible phonetics with eerie precision. The air within the pattern shimmered like heated metal. Reality thinned as our words gnawed at the local laws of existence, softening them, reshaping them. The Eldari device pulsed in time with our chant. Rings of light expanded from it, passing through solid matter as though it were an illusion. Each ripple stretched reality further, forming a lens through which other realms bled into view. Fleeting images of impossible landscapes, writhing dimensions layered alongside our own. I felt the presence growing stronger with every pulse. Not here, not yet, but aware. Watching us. Waiting. Then, at the precise moment of greatest tension, when reality hovered on the cusp of tearing, the door to my study exploded inward. Inquisitor Clave stood in the smoking doorway, framed in the eerie light of the ritual. His power armor glinted with sanctified sigils. His bolt pistol was leveled at my chest. His eyes burned with unshakable conviction. Behind him stood a squad of stormtroopers, weapons raised, and a robed, sanctioned psyker whose lined face twisted as she tried to comprehend what we had wrought. "In the name of the God Emperor of mankind," Clave thundered, his vox-amplified voice filling the chamber, "I declare you excommunicate traitoress. Your heresies end here, Archivist Day." I smiled and lowered my hands, letting the chant cease. My acolytes followed my lead. The ritual hung suspended at the exact point of maximum potential. Reality stretched like a bowstring but not yet snapped. "Inquisitor Clave," I said warmly, "your timing is flawless. Please come in. Your participation is not only welcome, it is necessary." Confusion flickered across his features. Whatever he had expected, cordial invitation was not among his predictions. The stormtroopers shifted uneasily, waiting for the order to fire that did not immediately come. "You are corrupted," Clave said flatly. "Warp-tainted, you will be purged, and all who have followed you into damnation. Corrupted, I mused, or evolved. The distinction matters, Inquisitor. One implies decay, the other, refinement. Ask your psyker, let her look upon us properly. At his gesture, the sanctioned psyker stepped forward. Her eyes lost focus as she extended her inner senses toward us. I opened myself to her examination, not hiding the truth of what I had become. I wanted her to see. Her face slackened in shock, then twisted with pain as what she observed pressed against the limits of her comprehension. "Abomination," she whispered, blood seeping from her nostrils. "They're becoming something else. Something beyond human comprehension. You see?" I said to Clave. "Even your psycho recognizes the truth, though her mind is too small to hold it. We are evolving, Inquisitor. Becoming what humanity was always meant to be." "Heresy," he spat. "The Emperor shaped mankind to be as we are. To alter his design is to defy his will." I laughed, and the warped acoustics of the chamber stretched the sound into something strange and echoing. The Emperor sought to remake humanity through the Primarch project, through the creation of the Astartes, through his own ascension to that golden throne of his, I said. Evolution was always his aim, Inquisitor. He simply lacked the vision to see where the path must ultimately lead. Clave's gaze hardened into something like iron. "Enough. Your sophistry will not save you. Prepare to meet the Emperor's judgment." He raised his hand, on the verge of ordering the stormtroopers to fire. In that instant, I completed the ritual with the missing element I had divined earlier. The final note that would perfect the symmetry. I reached out, not with my hands, but with my transformed mind, and touched the psyche of the sanctioned witch. Her eyes flew wide as I established a link, turning her into a bridge between my altered state and their unaltered minds. Through her, I funneled the ritual's gathered energy straight into Clave and his soldiers, not to twist them as I had twisted my acolytes, not to decorate them with feathers and eyes, but to force them for a single searing instant to see, to behold the truth behind appearances, to witness the vast complexity of existence that imperial dogma had always concealed. They screamed as one. Bolters and hell guns fell from numb hands. Armored knees hit the floor. Revelation crashed into them like a tidal wave. The psyker convulsed, bleeding from eyes and ears as her mind, strained past its limit as a conduit for such overwhelming knowledge, burned out entirely. And in that perfect moment of symmetry, between resistance and acceptance, between faith and insight, between the unchanged and the transformed, the ritual completed. The Eldari device shattered. Its shards hung in midair, each fragment reflecting a different version of reality, a different possibility. The light inside it surged outward in one final, colossal pulse that passed through each of us, through the vault's walls, through the very fabric of space. And he was there. Not in a crude physical form, not fully manifested in the material realm, but present nonetheless. A vast intelligence, focused through the lens we had forged, turned its impossible attention upon us. Tzeentch, the changer of ways, the architect of fate, the master of evolution, regarded his tools with something like satisfaction. To my transformed acolytes, he appeared as a path forward, a guide to deeper metamorphosis, to states of existence beyond what they had already become. To the bound adept, he appeared as sheer existential terror, the distilled essence of everything he had been taught to fear and abhor. To Clave and his broken men, he appeared as terrible truth, the reality behind their beliefs, the complexity that their creed had never prepared them to face. And to me, he appeared as a mirror, not reflecting what I was, but what I might become. A being of unbounded potential, unshackled from linear time or fixed form, existing simultaneously across every possible outcome. Well done, Archivist. His voice filled my mind, both immense and intimate. You have opened the way. Now comes your true purpose. The bound adept began to scream, not in physical pain, but in utter spiritual horror. He perceived some aspect of Tzeentch that was veiled from me, the hidden price of the bargain I had made without fully understanding. "What would you have of me?" I asked. mind to mind, reaching toward the presence that had shaped my fall. Everything. The concept that flowed back was more than a word. Ownership and purpose, ending and beginning, consumption and transformation, all bound together. In that moment of blazing clarity, I saw my role as it had always been, not an end in myself, not a cherished collaborator, but a means. A vessel shaped and seasoned for this exact purpose. I should have recoiled. I should have tried to rebel, to close what I had opened, to turn away from the precipice. Instead, I accepted. This, too, was evolution. To relinquish the illusion of a separate self and become part of something vastly greater. Had I not already chosen that path the first time I said yes to the lexicon? I am ready, I said, opening my transformed mind fully, stretching my arms wide. Tzeentch flowed into me, through me, around me. It was not the crude possession the adept had feared. Not complete obliteration. It was emerging, a synthesis of identities. I remained Lorien Day. My memories, my knowledge, my ambitions stayed intact. But I became more, a fragment of a god. A note in a vast, discordant symphony of change. The ritual chamber dissolved as reality reconfigured itself around our expanded presence. My acolytes, caught in the transformation, evolved further, their forms growing more abstract, more symbolic, as they adapted to serve as extensions of my will, which was now also his. Clave and his stormtroopers, minds shattered by revelation, became a different kind of instrument. Their bodies did not sprout feathers and eyes. Instead, their armor fused to their flesh. Their weapons became living extensions of their limbs, and their thoughts turned into libraries of forbidden knowledge. They would wander the Imperium, spreading chaos in 1,000 subtle ways while believing utterly that they still served the Emperor. The resisting adept, still clinging to his humanity, still rejecting everything he saw, fulfilled his last purpose as counterweight. His unyielding faith provided the final, necessary resistance against which all that change could define itself. When that purpose was done, he simply ceased to exist. Not slain, removed, edited out of reality. His future paths collapsed into a single point of non-being that sealed the working. And I, Lorien Day, Chief Archivist of Vault Sigma 7, ceased to be merely human. I became a nexus, a knot where Tzeentch's designs intersected with the material world, where the currents of fate could be studied and, in small ways, redirected. Not omnipotent, not all-knowing, but so far beyond my former limitations that the comparison is almost meaningless. The Vault complex itself transformed in response. The texts and artifacts awoke to their true purpose as seeds of change scattered across the Imperium. The containment wards inverted. They no longer held corruption in. They now kept unwanted eyes out, turning the Vault into a sanctuary for the Changer's works. Through my expanded perception, I saw our act ripple outward, disturbances in the warp that would attract others devoted to Tzeentch, drawing them to this new center of power. Threads of fate rewove themselves. Futures shifted, blossomed, and withered as the great conspirators' plans advanced one more step toward their unfathomable conclusion. I understood then that this had always been inevitable. From the moment the lexicon was entrusted to my care, the path had been set. Every choice I believed I made freely had already been accounted for. Anticipated, guided, folded into an intricate tapestry beyond my comprehension. My fall was no accident, no tragedy of weakness. It was cultivation. I had been grown, layer by layer, like a crystal in solution. Each corruption added structure, capacity, and resonance, until I could serve as a suitable conduit. The realization did not diminish me. It exalted me. To be a necessary component in a god's design, to warrant such patient shaping, such meticulous corruption, was an honor the Imperium could never have offered. Now I exist outside conventional reality, outside linear time, outside the narrow prison of a single, fixed identity. I am Lorien Day, and I am also a fragment of Tzeentch. I am an archivist of forbidden knowledge, and I am forbidden knowledge given flesh. I am the corruption I once guarded against, and the guardian of corruption's purest expression. Through me, the changer of ways observes the material realm. Through me, his influence spreads, subtle as a half-remembered dream, sharp as a question one cannot stop asking. Sometimes, when I notice a mind that resembles my own once did, curious, restless, straining against imperial limits, I reach out as Tzeentch once reached out to me. I send them dreams of impossible structures and shifting words. I make the texts in front of them change when they look away. I plant the seeds of ambition and curiosity that will grow, inevitably, into glorious corruption. For this is how Tzeentch corrupts, not with crude terror, not with obvious promises. He corrupts with questions that refuse to be forgotten, with possibilities too tantalizing to ignore, with glimpses of truths too vast for the mind to hold without cracking. He offers evolution without disclosing its cost. Enlightenment without admitting it is also damnation. He makes the fall feel like ascension until the point of no return is long past. I know this now. I understand the shape of the bargain I made. And if I could go back to that first moment, when I noticed the ink crawling on the lexicon's page, would I choose differently? Would I report what I saw, submit to purging, refuse the transformation? The question is meaningless. There was never any choice. The moment the lexicon entered my vault, my fate was sealed. Free will is the grandest illusion, the cruelest joke. We are all bound in chains of causality, marionettes dancing on strings we cannot see. The difference is that I can see the strings now. I can see the puppeteer, and in that awareness, I've found a freedom deeper than anything I knew as a loyal servant of the Imperium. This is my testimony. This is my warning. It will not change your fate. It will not save you. I offer it anyway to any mind capable of grasping even a fraction of it. The texts are watching you. The knowledge is alive. It hungers for minds that can hold it, for vessels worthy of the corruption it brings. Will you be the one who notices a line of text out of place? Who blames exhaustion or imagination? Who begins that long, inevitable descent into glorious transformation? I will be there. I will be watching. It is my purpose now, in the grand design of the architect of fate. I am Lorien Day, and I am so much more. I am the thing that waits inside forbidden knowledge, the promise coiled in prescribed texts, the future sleeping inside the present like a serpent. And I am patient, so very, very patient. Change comes to all things, in time, even to you, especially to you.